So, good evening everyone, distinguished guests and friends. So first of all, let me express my gratitude to the Australian Friends of Palestine, AFOPA, the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, APAN, and the Palestinian Christians in Australia for inviting me to this country and to tonight's gala. My gratitude also goes to the Commissioner of the Commission of Inquiry on Israel and Palestine, Chris Sidoti, who has joined me on this visit in his own country and tonight, which meant that he had to miss his 9-year-old grandchild's birthday party, so thank you, Chris. Before starting, I wish to pay tribute to the Daraq Nation, who are the traditional custodians of this land. And I also would like to pay respects to the elders, the past and the present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may be present here today. As I acknowledge that indigenous people in this country, as elsewhere across the world, have never ceded sovereignty, my heart goes to Palestine, where settler colonialism has not won over the native people yet, and they are fighting an existential struggle, not to be forcibly displaced from or fatally subjugated in the little that remains of their historical homeland. Now let me tell you just who I am as a special rapporteur. My mandate entails monitoring and reporting to the United Nations on the violations of international law committed by Israel in the Palestinian territory it occupies. This job is an honorary job, so it's not paid, although it's very demanding, and this is a position that I'm proud to serve as the 8th and first woman in the 30-year history of this mandate. Across this visit, I was prepared to discuss findings of my 16-month observation as a special rapporteur. I mean, my work would be to go to the occupied Palestinian territory, talk to people, see what violations of international law take place, and then report to the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council. But credit to Israel, I'm not able to enter the occupied Palestinian territory. So what I do, I invest a lot of effort in going around where I'm invited to talk about what I still know. Because the thing is that the occupied Palestinian territory is probably one of the places on earth where violations are the most well documented on earth. And there are Palestinian human rights organizations and Israeli human rights organizations and international organizations, UN experts denouncing year after year what happens to women, men, children, the elderly, and clearly, increasingly, the overarching structure of apartheid that Israel has morphed into. And of course, I don't spare criticism for the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank or for the de facto authority in Gaza. My approach is people-centered. I look at what the people endure, and this is where my denunciation is about. But however, the tragic hours we are living and the ground zero of humanity that we have been thrown into since October 7 forced me to adjust what I had planned to deliver tonight. So I will start by tackling what is unfolding under our eyes. Since the beginning of my term as a special rapporteur and the years that preceded it, the reality in the occupied Palestinian territory has evolved as a troubling one, which could explode any moment. And yet, never could I have fathomed to speak to you in the face of such a tragic moment, when thousands of innocents have been killed in the occupied Palestinian territory and in Israel. And I have extended my deepest condolences to all civilians affected by the ongoing war, and to the many across the world who are suffering with them. Many of you are here tonight. I particularly direct this message to the Palestinian and the Jewish communities in Australia. Since the event of the 7th of October, when 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals were killed in Israel, with thousands more injured following attacks by Hamas from the occupied Gaza Strip. Much more has happened. Of course, what Hamas did are war crimes, because killing civilians is a war crime and must be accounted for. But however, what Israel has done in reaction, embarking on an unrelenting bombardment of Gaza that has entered its 36th day today, killing over 11,000 people, almost 5,000 of them children, injuring 70,000 people and displacing 1.5 million. And among those killed, there are journalists, medical personnel, humanitarian officers, with 192 UN staff members killed. This has been the most lethal conflict in the history of the organization. Around all these victims, 50% of the housing units in Gaza have been turned into rubble or close to this. Israeli airplanes have bombed and destroyed residential areas, hospitals, schools, mosques, churches, cultural centers, and universities. Israel has even tightened the 16-year-old unlawful blockade, which was already a war crime before the 6th of October, and it has prevented the entry into Gaza of life-sustaining supplies, food, water, medicines, and fuel. Humanitarian aid has become a tool of war, exposing the population to the inescapable risk of death. War crimes, crimes against humanity, must be also accounted for. But not only that, they must be prevented. Together with other special rapporteurs, I warned against the risk that Israel might be committing genocide against the Palestinian people, because genocide is the intentional targeting of a population based on racial, national, ethnic, or religious lines, with intent to destroy them in total or in part. Certainly, the statements made by Israeli politicians and military leaders unveil a genocidal intent to wipe out Gaza and its residents, and this should not be ignored. Also, because of the 7th of October, in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, where Hamas has no authority, Israeli soldiers and armed settlers have been terrorizing defenseless Palestinian communities, killing 168 Palestinians, including 46 children, injuring over 2,500 and forcibly displacing 15 communities and depopulating 11 villages in South Hebron Hills area and in Jordan Valley. In the past days, the Israeli occupation forces have carried out heavily armed incursions by ground and air into densely populated refugee camps, Jenin, first and foremost. Flyers threatening the Palestinians to leave their land towards Jordan have also been distributed across the West Bank. So I keep on saying, if in 75 years the international community has still not understood what is the Nakba, there it is, televised under our watch. Correcting this requires a rehumanization of the discourse itself. And when I say that, I recall the concept of shared humanity that was so dear to Edward Said, who's passing, the 20th year of his passing we commemorate this year. Calling for the rehumanization of the discourse is something that will be done in the interest of both the Palestinians and the Israelis. But how do we do that, I ask myself. So for example, to correct this narrative, the first attempt I embarked on as I took on the role of special rapporteur has been by exposing the fundamental asymmetry in power, resources, and intent between Israelis and the Palestinians, and the unequal and iniquitous relationship between the two. Because we often hear again and in this country and in Europe, in the US and in Canada and elsewhere, talking about the parties. The parties have to return to the negotiation table. But how can they do that when the relationship remains one between the occupier and the occupied, the colonizer and the colonized? In an attempt to contribute to humanize the discourse, I decided this year to talk about children, because I thought, if one understands what the occupation is for children who constitute half of the population of Palestine. And then before the 6th of October, I said, when you think of Gaza, think that half of the population is not even 18. Think that 40% of the population is not even 15. So at least half of the population has clearly not voted for Hamas, just as a parenthesis. Summer, I've been talking, again, I cannot go to the occupied Palestinian territory, but I've been talking to many kids, many children, their parents. It was not easy. We had to organize many Zoom calls. We had interpreters, and still it has been really the highlight of my summer somewhat, because otherwise it was awful counting the deaths in the occupied Palestinian territory. I keep on reminding people, before the 7th of October, 60 Israelis had been killed and 460 Palestinians had been killed. But this doesn't register very often with the audience. So I said, let me talk to kids, maybe. I mean, talking through the prism of kids will help. And it was a very moving experience, because these young lives carry a trauma. I mean, I was listening to Susan before. It's an intergenerational trauma. But for those in Gaza, for those in East Jerusalem, for those in the West Bank, it's very real, not something that has been transmitted by their parents or grandparents. And it's visible in their bodies, in their speech, in their movement. So over and above the sterility of numbers, because I've said, again, before the 7th of October, and in the last 20 years, 1,025 children had already been killed, Palestinian children, 25 Israeli children. Thousands of Palestinian children had been injured, and hundreds of Israeli children had been injured. Many Palestinian children and young adults had been maimed, including while protesting peacefully in Gaza. So again, these numbers might not tell the full picture, but in a way, but at the same time, behind every one of these figures, there are lives that have been mutilated, lives that have been disfigured. As Professors Neve Gordon and Nicola Perugini elucidate, Israel justifies its use of force against the Palestinians, including children, by presenting the entire Palestinian collective as inherently terrorists, as inherently threatening the Jewish people. This destroys children, turning their life into what Professor Nadira Shahoub-Kevorkian calls unchilding. It takes away the lightness of childhood and robs children of their future. Since 1967, over 1 million Palestinians, including children as young as 12, have been arrested and detained under authoritarian rules, enacted, enforced, and adjudicated by the Israeli military. People do not often understand that the Palestinians in the occupied territory live under a military dictatorship made of laws written by soldiers, applied by soldiers, and reviewed by soldiers in military courts. And military courts also try children. This is the only case in the world where you have children going through the military justice system. And the thing is that if you look at why Palestinians are arrested, this is something that I was really curious about, because I said, how come that 40% of the male population in the occupied Palestinian territory in 56 years have been arrested? What do they do? And we studied all the laws, all the military orders that lead Palestinians to be arrested and detained, and most of the cases are really criminalization of fundamental freedoms. I always give this one because it's telling, but it's not even the worst one. Being part of a gathering of 10 or more people where a political issue is discussed without the authorization of the army can lead to 10 years in jail. Throwing a stone can lead to 10 years in jail, but if you throw a stone with intent to harm, 20 years in jail. If you are a Palestinian who's found in an area that Israel declares a closed military zone, and many Palestinians live in this closed military area, you can be arrested and go to jail for 7 years. So, again, Palestinians are often arrested and subject to long detention for the simplest acts of life and the exercise of their fundamental freedoms. It's participating in gatherings, pronouncing political speeches, or writing on Twitter and social media in general. They are often presumed guilty without evidence, arrested without warrants, and detained without charge or trial, and brutalized while in custody. Mass incarceration premised on the treatment of Palestinians as a collective security threat has been used as a tool to subjugate the population under occupation, depriving them of self-determination, enforcing racial domination, and advancing territorial acquisition by force. But while in prison confinement is the most acute form of deprivation of liberty imposed on the Palestinians under occupation, Palestinians are detained, I say, both behind bars and beyond bars. Because when they are outside jail, they're still confined by walls, checkpoints, segregated roads, and other forms of physical confinement. And on top of it, there is the bureaucratic control, because I don't know how many of you would know, but Palestinians in the occupied territory need to apply for permits, whatever they want to do, building a house, going to school, taking residence, or just getting married. And on top of it, there is digital surveillance. There is nothing, there is no Palestinian that escapes this. This is why I describe the occupied Palestinian territory as saying Gaza is not the only open-air prison. It's the entire Palestinian territory, which is an open-air prison, a modern-day panopticon. A panopticon is a prison that is controlled from outside and inside, including by coercing people into becoming informants or collaborators. And this is something that unfortunately plagues the life of many children. But children are children. How can childhood exist in this system? Especially we should remind, including Israel, that today's children are tomorrow's adults. The necessity of reclaiming a more humane narrative is imperative, both to protect them and the society they will soon be part of. For many of them, and this is what I extracted from my report for you, Israel's settler colonial occupation manifests in a myriad of daily tragedies and traumatic experiences. It is the struggle of parents who, after protracted legal battles to reclaim confiscated land or homes, must watch the land cultivated by settlers. It is the imposing 8 meters wall which separates families and communities and curtails livelihoods and jobs. It's a father's heartbreak as he demolishes his unfinished home, unable to secure permits from the Israeli military, and with only the mortgage remaining to be paid. It's a depleted school, denied building permits, perpetually at risk of destruction by the military. It's an empty classroom, once filled with eager students and now resting in cemeteries. It's a brother, hailed as a martyr in the refugee camp, but labeled a terrorist by the Israeli military, who later comes to demolish the family home. This is what I heard from the dozens of kids I met from the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. And this is the human story that I try to recount as an impartial witness amidst legal interpretation and promising norms. And as I conclude, in today's political landscape marked by historical amnesia and outright political myopia, I offer The story of Palestine illustrates how international practice perpetrates injustice. Ending the occupation and colonization is the imperative mandated by international law simply to allow the other to live in freedom, safety, and dignity. This is what justice means in its simplest form, and this is also what humanity means in its purest form. And in this rehumanization discourse, I convincingly include the Israelis. They are part of an anachronistic settler colonial endeavor, but of course, with unparalleled responsibilities, unparalleled agency, and unparalleled suffering. And ending Jewish-Israeli domination will be a rehumanizing act for the Israelis as well, because no one can oppress and brutalize others, other human beings, without themselves experiencing a loss of humanity in the process. And I also hope that others will join this call for justice and embrace what I call a paradigm shift, a dramatic shift that needs to happen in our mind, but not in this room, but again, for other Australians. And I see the possibility of producing what I like to call a butterfly effect. Overcoming, do you know the butterfly effect, what it is, no? A butterfly on its own does nothing, but if all the butterflies flap their wings, they can produce a storm. So overcoming our fragility as individuals together, we have the power to create a profound transformation in the name of our shared humanity. And shukran jazila.